Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you the books and resources we use for our Lewis and Clark expedition and the Western movement. So I have a number of resources here, probably more than what we could have gotten through for this unit, but surprisingly, we got through everything. So I was super thrilled about that. And I think in large part is because a lot of the books that we had were fairly short or they were picture books. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is this game called Lewis and Clark Exploration Card Game. It's by the History Channel and it's a beautiful game, but it's not a super engaging game in my opinion. But we did play it a couple of times during this unit, and we also used the cards for another project for this unit. So it comes with this really beautifully illustrated map that shows the whole journey for the Lewis and Clark expedition, and it's color-coded to show who had ownership over these different lands. Has the instruction booklet, and it also has a set of two sets of stickers. The cards are really nice. The cards show different wildlife and Native American tribes, as well as the people who were on the expedition on one side of the card, as well as a bit of content for each of the cards. It also has the date here that shows when these entries were made into the journal that Lewis and Clark kept during this whole expedition. So anytime they came upon a new tribe or they discovered some new wildlife that they didn't know before, they would make an entry and talk about it and possibly had an illustration. They also collected a lot of specimens and samples and sent them back to Washington to President Thomas Jefferson. And so these cards just kind of depict that whole journey in really beautiful illustrations with just enough content. The reason why we didn't end up using this game, or it's not as engaging as we hoped, is because in order to play the game, I believe you need to just get like 7 in a row with the numbers. And so it kind of takes away learning the content if you're just looking for the numbers in order to win the game, unless we're playing the game wrong or it's just one way to play the game, which is totally possible. And so that made it not quite as engaging as we hoped. But we did use this multiple times, and we do plan to use it again. It is really beautiful, and the cards are so instructional, educational. I would still recommend this this game. The big project for this unit, actually we probably had 2 projects, but this was the big one, was to make a field journal using this leather that we got from a kit many years ago. So I apologize that I don't have the original kit with me. It comes with the cording here in order to bind it. And then we used some heavy watercolor paper. This is 140-pound hot press Fabriano watercolor paper. And I just cut it down to size and rounded the corners, and then my son punched the holes, and then we threaded the entire thing with the cording that came with the kit, but it didn't come with the needle, so I just used one of our yarn needles, or our knitting needles. And then this is what he used in order to do a lot of the content for this unit. He still used his main lesson book, which I want to show you. He still has his main lesson book, and this was primarily what he used for all of the written content for this unit, as well as our Colonial America unit and our American Revolution unit. So this was his main lesson book, but he also used this in order to fill in specifically about the Lewis and Clark expedition. So he has the map, and he has it looking like a field journal. He did entries on the 4 main people of the expedition, and then he has different entries on the different things that they found along the way, as well as some illustrations. So we are both super pleased with the way that this turned out. He loved it so much he wants to make another one as a personal journal. So huge success for this major project for this unit. Okay, let me show you the books that we went through. For his assigned reading, he did Of Courage Undaunted, and he was able to read this book really quickly. and it gave a nice overview in detail of the whole Lewis and Clark expedition. He also read this one, which he read so quickly. This is a super fast read. I really like this series of books because they are really easy to read. They're very quick. They give you a nice overview or a nice general view of the biography of whoever it is that you're studying. And it's great for adults if you've forgotten about any part of history or any biography. These are really great books. And then it also includes several pages in here with some pictures of different artifacts or portraits of Lewis and Clark and things like that. So definitely something I would recommend. Bewildered for 3 days. I picked up this book at the library bookstore for probably a quarter. So a really great deal. And I have to admit that when I saw the cover, I wasn't super intrigued. The reason why I picked it up is because I'm always on the lookout for books that will complement our history units and our science units, or just anything that will complement any one of our units, but especially picture books for our history units and our science units. So because it was about Daniel Boone, and I picked this up after we had done our first history unit study, it's been in our library for at least a year, just not being used. So this was the first time we read through it, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't even going to read it. It didn't really look that intriguing to me. It turned out to be the best book in the entire unit. I absolutely love the way that it's written. It's super captivating. It's awesome. And I learned so much about Daniel Boone, and it was written in such a storybook format. It's basically told from his perspective when he was a child and he was lost for 3 days, or just not found for 3 days in the woods. I cannot say enough good things about this book. Definitely add it to your personal library. It's a great read, whether you're doing a Western movement unit or not. I just really, really love the way that it was written. You wouldn't want to explore with Lewis and Clark, an epic journey you'd rather not make. And this is the one time that I feel like this series of books kind of fell short for me. I've loved these series so much, but the only reason why I didn't like this book as much as the other ones is because in the past, the last time we did this unit, or actually 2 times before we did this unit about 8 years ago, I read a book to the children that was a lot more detailed about the entire Lewis and Clark expedition, with a lot more excerpts from the journal that Lewis and Clark kept, and that book was phenomenal. It was so in-depth. It was a wonderful resource. It took us a long time to get through, and I'm sorry that I don't remember the name of that particular resource. We picked it up from the library, and I didn't write down the title, but that was like by far the best book we've ever written, or we've ever read on the Lewis and Clark expedition. And so reading these other books that basically summarize the expedition fall short for me personally. But if you don't want to invest in reading something that's a lot heavier, then of course these books will be fine, as well as some of the other ones that I have to show you. But I kind of regret that I didn't look for that same resource and just focus just on that resource rather than like the 12 books that we actually read through, because that one was better written. It was more complete. It had a lot more excerpts that were told in the voice of Lewis and Clark than all of these other books. A picture book of Lewis and Clark. I really like the books by David Adler. He has a number of them in his series, and you can see this one here, a picture book on Davy Crockett. This one was written a little bit different than the other ones he's written, or maybe it's because the illustrations are updated and different and new, but I found it was a little bit different than what I've seen from him before. However, they were still really good. I think, again, I had really high expectations for a Lewis and Clark expedition unit study simply because of some of the books that we've read in the past. And so what ended up happening with this particular unit is that we had a lot of books that were really similar. So we were able to get through them really quickly because they were short and they were picture books, but the information got so redundant and there wasn't a lot of new stuff. Like every book might have 1 or 2 things that were new, and then like 45 things that we already knew because we'd already read them. So it didn't make it quite as captivating. It got a little bit you know, tedious after a while. The illustrations in this book are fabulous. They're really beautiful. And so if you get any books I always look for them at the library bookstore or any other thrift stores. And I definitely like adding them into our units. And here's one that's a little bit more characteristic of the illustrations and the writing style that he has for the majority of his books. This is the picture book on Davy Crockett. You can see the illustrations, as lovely as they are, just for me feel a little bit dated, but overall the stories are well written and they give you a really nice, good overview of whoever the book is about. The Louisiana Purchase, From Independence to Lewis and Clark. This book provided a lot of the drier content for this unit, and while it was important to have all of this information, I wonder how much the children are actually going to remember because it was in a more textbook format, a nonfiction textbook format. It was still important to have some of these books within this unit, but as far as this being a captivating book, it was not. And the way that we read this was as a read aloud. I read it aloud to the children, and we read as much as we could in one day before we just felt saturated, and then we would move on and break it up with a picture book, and then the following day we would read more of it. So I think it took us probably 3 or 4 days to read through this whole book, and again, we just broke it up with the other picture books that I've got. How We Crossed into the West, The Adventures of Lewis and Clark. I actually ended up liking this one a lot more than I would have expected, and this was the last book that we read for this unit, and I was really prepared just to let it go. But I really, really liked the way that it was written because it was written in more of a story format, and it also included a lot of captions, or excerpts rather, from the Lewis and Clark journal, the actual journal, the historical journal that they kept. And so for that reason, I ended up liking this book a lot more than I expected. I can't say that I'm crazy about the illustrations, but after a while they kind of grew on me, and so I was kind of pleasantly surprised about that. But of all the books that I am showing you, I would actually recommend this one, even though for me that's kind of a surprise. I thought it was well done. Discovering the West, The Expedition of Lewis and Clark. You can see that there are just a ton of books that are basically on the same subject area, but when we were purchasing these books, it was really hard for me to get a feel of what the books were going to be about, how the content was going to be laid out, whether it was going to be intriguing or not. So that's why there are so many duplicates of these kinds of books. This is one that I would recommend just picking up from the library. You do not need to own it. It was nicely written in the sense that it had chapters that made it a lot easier for you to get through a book like this rather than it just being one long drawn out book, more similar to this one, the Louisiana Purchase. But overall, by this point in the unit, a lot of these things were redundant, and this wasn't the most captivating book, so this is not one that I would recommend unless it was the only one that you were going to have as a nonfiction book for your unit. Alamo. This is a book that I assigned to my son to read because it includes information on Davy Crockett and I think one more. The name escapes me, but someone else that was famous at the Alamo. And because I think that the whole story behind the Alamo and Texas history is so intriguing to me, the very first time we went through this unit, we were actually living in Texas, and we spent a great deal of time with our history units talking about local history and the Western movement and just that time period in American history. So we did visit the Alamo, and we did visit the state capitol in Austin, and we did learn about Stephen Austin and other historical figures who were significant, Sam Houston, I believe, and just a lot of the people who are pivotal in Texas history. And so I did want my son to read this as well, since some of the people in this unit are in the Alamo, but he wasn't able to read the whole thing, and this is definitely a drier book, and I don't believe that I actually shared this when I was putting the unit together. I can't remember, I apologize. But diving deeper into the Alamo and that whole history is intriguing to me, and so I wanted to bring that to the kids. The Lewis and Clark Expedition. This is a series these books are basically workbooks with information. You read the beginning parts, and then you can answer the questions. And the only reason why I pulled this out is so that I could have a little bit of busy work for my son. I know that I need to have some things that I can assign to him rather than having everything be something that I read aloud or that he reads to himself. And since we don't use worksheets very much in our homeschool, this is something that's kind of new and intriguing. And so I did go ahead and I photocopied a few pages for him to do. He read the portion above the worksheets and then did them. And this is something that I would use sparingly. Personally, I wouldn't go through this cover to cover. But if you didn't have a lot of other content, I think just reading the information without writing or answering the questions would be of value. The last book I want to show you is called Struggle for the Continent. This was the read aloud. Well, actually, they were all read alouds, but this is one that I definitely wanted all of my students to be listening to as I read this book. This is part of the American Story series. I really, really like this series. I think it's written in a really fantastic way. It does have a ton of information. I think it's a way better option than a textbook because it's written by authors rather than a team of researchers. I love all the illustrations. Overall, I think this was a really fabulous addition for this unit. However, it does have a lot of information, and so we would read as many pages as we could before we just had to set the book aside. But of all of the resources, I find that this was a really complete resource. However, I wanted to include this between our two units. We were doing a Colonial America unit and also an American Revolutionary unit, which actually the American Revolution was supposed to come before our Western movement, but we flipped them. So I cannot even explain that well enough, but that's just what happened. But that's why I included this book with this unit. And it's really not supposed to go with this unit. It really would have been better placed with an American Revolution time period unit study. So the Western movement is more like the late 1700s and 1800s, and this book deals more with the late 1600s through the 1700s. So just want to put that out there. Okay, so this is my son's main lesson book for this unit. It went through all three units that we did for this this time period, and he went through The History of Us by Joy Hakim, and he read this independently, and then he wrote narrations about each of the chapters. The chapters are fairly short. There's a lot of captions and illustrations and photographs, and so it makes it, I think, an easier read just to get through the information. Also, the chapters are really short. I think it's also really well done, but this is not one that I have read. I've only ever assigned this whole series of books to my children. There are 10 in the series, and I pulled volume 2 and 3 for this unit. Just want to show you 2 other activities that we did for this unit. We did the Indian Relics Dig, Discover, and Display Kit. This is not one that I actually showed while we were putting this unit together. We ended up doing one with our American Revolution unit, and my daughter wanted to do one that my son was doing, but I didn't have the same one that he had. But I did have one on Indian relics, and so she did that one, and it just has some arrowheads and then some shards of pottery, and then it comes with all the materials to excavate this and then paint it. So that was the big project that we did for this unit for my daughter, in addition to the field journal that my son did. And then I also had this Lewis and Clark little kit with these little plastic figures, and then it also came with, I want to say this is Fort Mandan or Fort Clatsop. I can't remember actually, but it was just, the backing of this whole kit came with this little thing that you cut out and then you can assemble. So that was the fort, and then it comes with the horses and the Native American Indians and then some of the other things. And so I thought my kids would enjoy this more, but they didn't play with this hardly at all. I think they only played with it twice, and we didn't even take out all of the different pieces. So I was really excited about this, and I thought that they would really enjoy this, but not as much of a win as I thought, but that happens sometimes. Okay, so I think that covers it. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video for all of the projects that we did, as well as links to the books that we used. If you want to see some of the other tutorials for this history unit, you can tap on the screen right now. And if you want to see how our homeschool is progressing on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.